Good evening from the Gail Lemron Auditorium on the campus of Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach. Welcome to the President's Speaker Series. On behalf of President John P. Johnson, I'm Marc Bernier, the moderator for tonight's event. Tonight, a different opportunity at a guest for you to all hear and enjoy. The story of a man, language, his father, the Vietnam experience, and more. Ladies and gentlemen, this will be a little different from the political and social issues we talk about, but it reminds us of the difference between men and women. This is not Mars and Venus, but the story of a young man who grows up and learns the truth not only about himself, but about his family. And he learns a lot about himself through talking to others. The story is The Language of Men. And our guest tonight, joining us from Massachusetts, is Anthony D'Arias. Anthony, thanks for coming in to talk with us about your memoir tonight.
Thanks for having me.
The whole issue of the book opening with the Vietnam experience, the thing that got me was, what prompted you to say to Vanessa, your wife, let's go to Vietnam and find out what Dad experienced?
Well, I guess it kind of began with a lot of the interviews that I had done with my father, and the main focus of those interviews was his time in Vietnam. I was really fascinated by his time in Vietnam. I kind of maybe naively in my head built it up to be this defining moment in his life, and I wanted to know more about it. So that's kind of where my conversations with my father began. And then I was expecting, I grew up with a kind of Hollywood version of what the Vietnam War was, as a lot of people in my generation did. So I was expecting those types of stories, and the stories that I got were more about my father's relationships with prostitutes during the war and his very candid descriptions of it. My dad has just an amazing, colorful vocabulary that I describe in the book as a mixture of, Foghorn Leghorn and Richard Pryor, and he just has such this mishmash of movie quotes and song lyrics and this slang that I was always just so fascinated with. So his stories led me to a place where I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting that to be the focus of our conversations. But then later on, my wife, Vanessa, who's a feminist, started doing work with women's health, women's reproductive rights, and she actually got a job teaching health and anatomy classes to former sex workers in Vietnam. And it was right at a point in the process of writing the book that I felt like I wanted to go to Vietnam, spend some time there. And it was one of those, the monologue that begins the book in my father's monologue, just was one of the most kind of colorful and interesting stories that he told me. And it kind of touched on a lot of economic issues that I was interested in and his experiences while he was there. And it felt like a nice kind of explosive way to start the book.
This whole idea for this event came as a result of a suggestion from Dr. M.B. McLatchey. And when she brought the idea to me, I had no idea that I would learn what I've learned. And I read these books right before the guest arrives so that the ideas are still fresh in my mind as well as they would be with any reviewer. And I had no idea about all of the different experiences that people are going to find if they read this book. Would you say that your relationship, from what I read, was you were closer to your father and mother than your brother?
Yeah, I think in some ways. I think I was especially close. I think I was close with my mother and my father, but in separate ways. My dad and I did a lot of kind of physical things. We rebuilt cars. We just spent a lot of time doing, Cub Scouts, camping, things like that. With my mother, it was more talking. And I think I tried to kind of combine that. A lot of the talking that I do with my mom, I was like, I could ask her questions. I could question her about things. I wanted to do the same with my father. And I think that's partly where the book began too, was kind of questioning some of the things that we just did naturally or instinctively.
Was this therapy for you?
I don't like to use the word therapy with memoir. I think memoir often gets misconstrued as some kind of therapeutic act. I think it can be. I think in a lot of ways, it changed relationships in my life with, my father and some other people in my family, other family members. But I don't see it as kind of a therapeutic act, or I want to separate the difference between kind of just getting something off your chest and searching through your memories and your past for connections, or trying to shape your memories into some kind of form or narrative, which was what kind of drew me to memoir, was kind of that, so compared to a fiction writer, where a fiction writer might be, creating scenes from scratch. I like the idea of having the ingredients there, and then I have to decide what I'm making, what I'm cooking up.
Now, before we get to the Vietnam experience, just to share with you, anyone who buys this book, there are things that everyone in this room has had happen. You wonder, why do these things happen in families? Classic example, it's Christmas Day, and it's a holy day, and it's a day of reverence and the birth of Jesus and giving. What is this family doing? They're watching De Niro movies. On the couch, it's your father, and he's seen these movies many times. Mm-hmm. To me, and your mom said what people have always said, why did they show these things on Christmas? Talk about that a little bit.
And yeah, when my mom says that, my dad responds, it's a tape. It was just something so natural that we didn't really even question. It was like, why not watch gangster movies when and they're shooting each other up while mom's making pancakes in the kitchen on Christmas? And it became this very kind of iconic scene for me, because here's a moment where all the guys are in the living room and we're, almost in a huddle, right? We're huddled around the TV watching this movie that we know by heart. We can recite these lines. We're communicating, but we're communicating with other people's words, and we're comfortable in that zone. And there were a lot of moments where I felt like my mom was outside that huddle and trying to kind of break in certain moments. And the language that we had together that kind of referenced these movies and songs and these things that we thought were just for us. My mom often knew those lyrics, knew those quotes, but she was kind of boxed out sometimes.
I found it interesting because the mother's raising all these questions, yet she bought Dad a big TV.
There was a little back and forth there.
How would you describe the relationship between your parents?
I think it's great. I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's really strong. I think what kind of led me to start questioning a lot of things was, so I grew up in a male-dominated house where it was more kind of unspoken and physical, where my wife grew up in a house of mostly women, and I would go over there and the TV would be off and they'd be sitting on the couch asking each other questions and talking. And they knew so much about each other, and they talked so often. And it just fascinated me from the start. So I figured, okay, let me try to do that with my family. Let me start asking these questions, or trying to communicate in the way that I see my wife communicating with her family. And I think in some ways, not as immediate as I may have, again, naively expected in the beginning, like I'm going to publish this book and my family's going to read it and everything's going to change,
You did it
right?
for family exercise at first?
No, I mean, I think some part of me, I was doing it anyway. I wanted to write this book, but some part of me was like, well, what will change, or will anything change? Will the way that we communicate change? And I think it's kind of naive to expect the book to do that. It was such a big part of my life. I spent so much time on it. For me, writing was that book. And when I was done with the book, there was kind of this, something like postpartum depression.
Yeah.
There was kind of like, well, if I'm not writing that book, what am I writing? But back to your question, I think I think some parts in the book I just remember my mother saying that she was surprised that I noticed these things, or I didn't think anyone was listening, was kind of a comment that she would say sometimes. So I think it's definitely kind of sent a ripple effect through my family. And it's been different. It's been a roller coaster in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's brought us closer, sometimes it hasn't.
Did anybody step up, either Don, your brother, or Dad, or Mom, and say, you can't put that in?
No, that's the thing. I mean, they were always so supportive, and I was very transparent. I was, this is what I'm working on, here's the draft, here's what I'm doing. I didn't see the need to add any kind of surprise to it. And they'd come to readings, they knew I was working on stories about our family, and so I didn't want to blindside anyone.
This book is very personal and somewhat shocking at times. You reveal things about yourself that are pretty deep and sometimes dark that I would not have expected a person to put in a memoir. An addiction to pornography and how it happens and how it changed things between you and Vanessa for a while. How did you get that under control?
I think it was one of those things where, the entire book is really about this idea of not questioning your behavior, right? So, I think a lot of the book is about me trying to decide what it means to be a man. So is being a man being violent? Is being a man being destructive? Is being a man being, closed off or emotionally illiterate? And I also felt like inherent in some of that kind of stereotypical macho behavior that I was taking in wholesale and not questioning was kind of, demeaning women, putting down women, or seeing women as objects. And I feel like I just kind of, my friends and I traded pornography like baseball cards, and I think a lot of boys growing up do. And I think having my wife's perspective, a strong feminist perspective on that, kind of just showed my behavior in a new light, and I was not, behavior that I was not questioning before.
Did you get help to stop?
No,
it was... You stopped on your own?
Yeah, it was just, I don't
She was working, in the book, she's working your home.
Yeah. Well, that's another big part of it too, right? This kind of work, and when you're unemployed, how does that affect kind of your understanding of masculinity, and that, kind of, if you're expected to provide or some way like that. I don't want it to seem like it was, something that was completely out of control. It was just, when behavior that I wasn't questioning started to impact my life, started to impact my relationship with Vanessa, I was trying to kind of take all of these kind of immature things that I just kind of took for granted when I was surrounded by guys, and this is what we do, or this is, just, trying to take that behavior and maintain it in a open relationship, communicating, a strong basis of communication in the relationship. They were just clashing. Worlds were kind of clashing in that moment. I was 22, Vanessa and I were just living together, and it was me not knowing, what the hell I was doing with my life, and, trying to kind of figure out just who I wanted to be and how I was going to do that, and how am I going to maintain some of the things that I felt comfortable with if they're not going to fit into where I want to go or what I want to do. And I think, kind of at the root of any addiction is just impulsive behavior that you don't question that starts to affect your entire life, starts to affect your relationships.
The story I found remarkable. Vanessa is home, pregnant, awaiting the arrival of your first child in April.
Yes.
how were you able to put it back together? Because she came home, she discovered you. I thought, this is it. And I turned the page, and you put it back together. You eventually marry, and you have your life now.
Yeah.
You know, a remarkable couple. Did you rely on faith? Was there some intervention that helped make the change?
No, I mean, we just kind of had it out a lot, you know? It was just, I think that was something that, you know, I saw a lot of friends' parents who were very vocal, very, you know, open to argue and wouldn't hesitate to argue and learned how to argue well. And I think there were moments where my parents probably should have argued, right? Should have, you know, had it out. And I think between me and Vanessa, we just kind of, it sounds cliche, but we kind of brought out the best in each other in terms of not backing down from things that we felt were taboo or off limits. And we're at a point in our relationship now where nothing is off limits, nothing is, and I think that's a big part of the pornography piece too, is that, okay, this is something guys do in secret. You know, we watch pornography and we masturbate by ourselves, and this is something we can't talk about. It has to be a separate thing from our relationship with our wives or partners. And in that secrecy, in that lack of communication is where the problem grew into something more severe, where it was the mystery around not talking about it. And I think that's when it became problematic.
Listeners, viewers, and readers will learn that you were part of a gang. I think the Destructos of some kind?
In high school, oh God. To hear someone else say it sounds so lame.
Well, I'm reading.
It was.
I mean, this is a group that I think we're talking in New York, Long Island, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay, where in Long Island?
A town called Northport.
Okay, and you go down some stairs, and I don't know whether everybody had been drinking or what. You punch out a glass.
Oh, that was in New York City.
This is before marriage.
Yeah, we were going down to a subway.
So
yeah.
how many are in this group?
4 or 5.
4 or 5. Okay, called the Destructos.
Yeah.
You've been punching each other, real roughhousing.
Yeah.
And I guess somebody, this is after post 9/11, so there's an officer with a gun in that area who sees you and says, all right, up against the wall.
Yeah.
What happened? Were you arrested for destroying public property?
No, see, that was the thing. I mean, we always kind of were able to sneak away and not get caught. And I think that, yeah, it was right after, pretty soon after 9/11, so there was a big, you know, strong military presence in New York City at the time, and there was, you know, guns and dogs, and it was very visible. And I remember the guy saying, you know, you're going to pull this shit while all this other stuff is going on. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
you know, that was his first reaction. And it was something that we didn't think about at the time, obviously. It was just, you know, we were kind of caught up in that, you know, that jackass type of behavior where it's, you know, my friends were kind of, you know, into BMX bikes and skateboarding and just hurting ourselves. And I think there was this kind of, you know, competitive nature of, you know, who can hurt themselves the most, and this kind of show of, I don't know, resiliency or endurance in some way, when it was really just about self-destruction and drinking.
Why did you decide to call it the language of men?
Because I kept feeling like each you know, event or each scene that I was writing about was kind of rooted in communication and rooted back into how we decide what we can talk about and what we can't, and what's communicated through verbal language, what's communicated through just the way we interact with each other, how we communicate our identity through language, and how we communicate our kind of changing identity through language.
When you went over to Vietnam, how long were you there?
My wife and I were there for about 3.5 months.
That's a long time. And she starts, in the book, she gets a little edgy after a while, because this is post-marriage, post the pornography period, all of that. And you're finding all of these houses of prostitution and places that your father frequented. Was it shocking? Was it hurtful? Did it bother you when you found out, yeah, my dad did this? But
No, I mean, it was, no, because I mean, like, I grew up with that Hollywood version of it, and I had, you know, at that point when I was in Vietnam, I was started to read books written from women's perspective, from Vietnamese women's perspective, from American women's perspectives, a lot of oral histories by sex workers during the war, just because that was a side of the war that wasn't often portrayed in the movies that we were watching. It was really just portrayed as, we all know the Full Metal Jacket scene, right? We just, we didn't hear those women talk. We didn't hear their stories. So the collections of oral histories that I read were really, really incredible for me to read. And then here I am in Vietnam while my wife is working with former sex workers, some of whom were sex workers during the war. And I think at that point, I was still just wandering around trying to figure out what I was writing about. I knew I was interested in these stories. I knew that, this opportunity to go to Vietnam presented itself, and there was a lot of overlap. And, there's times as a memoirist or a nonfiction writer where life kind of tells you what you should be writing about. And it was one of those moments where a lot of things are kind of overlapping here. There's something there. Even though I don't know what I'm writing about, there's still something that keeps drawing me back to this, pile of Word documents on my computer. And I think for Vanessa, she was unclear on what my fascination was with all of this. Here I am, I'm going to Vietnam with Vanessa. I have a tape recorder of my dad's interviews, and I'm kind of replaying them at certain points, almost as if he's narrating our trip. And after a while, she's just like, all right, I don't understand why you're so obsessed with these stories. Like, I'm going every day to a place where I'm trying to teach these women to, teaching basic anatomy and reproductive rights courses, and you're still caught up in this kind of Hollywood version of things. And there was, a moment where, we go to a movie theater in Vietnam, and they're playing Casualties of War, the Michael J. Fox movie, and
there's a very violent scene in there, and I think you're right about that.
Yeah, I mean, the movie is basically, a 90-minute rape scene where the Vietnamese woman is captured, and they just kind of take her through on tour with them, and Michael J. Fox is struggling to speak up or not speak up. And we're in this movie theater in Hanoi watching this, and it's full of Americans. The movie theater was full of Americans. We didn't see really any Vietnamese people watching this movie. And I kind of started to question, like, why am I doing this? I'm coming all the way to Vietnam, and I'm watching an American Hollywood version of the war. So I think that was something that was interesting to me, too, was what's real, what's not, what's an image, what's a reproduction.
We're going to come through the audience to take your questions for our guest, for Anthony D'Arius. But before you went to Vietnam, did your dad try to talk you out of going?
No, I mean, he was surprised that I was going, but he wasn't, he wouldn't try to talk me out of going. I think he was really amazed by my interest in it, and that I would want to do that. And that we would do that. It wouldn't, it wasn't something like, oh, we should go, we should do that. It was, we're going to do this.
What was your grandfather like? Do we know much about your grandfather?
My father's father?
Yeah.
I have really good memories of him, but I've heard stories of him having a quick temper, or being, having this very strong presence. He spent a lot of time out of work too, and I know that wasn't a good time for him. And I think this idea of work also fascinated me too. About,
is this the guy that tried to get into the aluminum siding business and a few other things?
Yeah.
And it didn't quite make it, and he was out of work?
That was kind of something that my dad and I have talked about, where his father seemed to always be kind of, one step behind these kind of big things that would have maybe turned into a career or given him some fulfillment in some way. And when he was out of work, is, from the stories I've gathered, is the time when he felt very just kind of unmoored and depressed. And then this opportunity came up for my grandmother and him to be caretakers on a farm on Long Island, and having that work, having that purpose kind of grounded him in a lot of ways that he didn't always have in his life. And I experienced the same thing too. I mean, I kind of wandered around a lot after college. I had some jobs here, and then not working, and then working, and then not working, and then, teaching is where I really felt like, okay, I became grounded, I had a foundation. But that idea of what's your purpose if you don't have a job that you like, or I don't know, I kind of grew up with this idea of you're supposed to hate work. Work sucks.
But your father loved work.
Yeah,
we read that. He loved to work, and he loved to work after work.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, that's one of the things I continue to admire about him, is that he has this very strong work ethic that I don't know if my brother and I have inherited directly. I think it kind of, my brother and I are much more thinking about what we should be doing, or how can we do this, or what's a career or job we're really going to love and be satisfied. Whereas my father kind of had maybe not the luxury to do that. And I think for a while I thought that was a bad thing. And I think more and more throughout writing this book and talking to him, I've realized that there's something freeing in that, to just kind of know that this is what you have to do, this is your job, this is work. And the structure of that and the routine, I think I've grown to appreciate structure and routine that I don't think I kind of rebelled against for a while.
Do you have a favorite passage in this book that you're particularly proud of, that you could read? We have students in the audience.
Sure, let me see.
Impromptu here, but
No, it's okay.
the book is about 257 pages. Softbound version is coming out this summer, I believe. Am I correct?
Oh, no, it's out.
It's out now?
Yep.
Okay. We have the hardcover version, and our associates will be selling copies of it, and you can get it autographed by Anthony when we conclude.
Let's see.
Sometimes some of our writers will read a passage. It's okay if...
No, I want to. I just want to find... Okay. My father speaks his own language, a hillbilly twang of the Looney Tunes dialect, Foghorn Leghorn, Yosemite Sam, mixed with the African-American jive of the dirtiest comedians, Red Fox or Richard Pryor. His swearing is part of a well-oiled machine, except when a driver cuts him off, then higher octane terms explode from his mouth. He cuts words in half, stresses whichever syllable he wants. Verbs become nouns and vice versa. He throws in song lyrics, movie quotes, even slogans from TV commercials. It all swirls together, and all you can do is try to keep up. I tried. Sometimes we could speak at his pace. Other times he'd lose me on a Sanford and Son reference, and our dialogue became a one-man show. I don't know where he got that pig language from, my grandmother says. None of the other boys talk like that. He gave all of my mother's sisters and my female cousins flirty construction worker on a coffee break nicknames. Baby, sugar, sweets, mama, girl, honey. He calls my wife Vanessa Van Halen, and when he met my brother's girlfriend Lola, he spelled out her name, just like the Kinks. In a letter to my mother from Vietnam, written in his scratchy mishmash of upper and lowercase letters, he calls her his little girl and says, let's not go spoiling this by telling Maddie, Maddie being his fiance at the time. He asked her, can you dig it? You gotta be jiving me. Hold on, mama, I'm coming home soon. He's perverted, but in a way that no one in our family seems to mind. He can pinch his sister-in-law's ass or make a sly comment about the perkiness of her breasts, and it doesn't seem to offend anyone. That's the reputation he's established and the one we've all come to expect. As a kid, I would hear snippets of my father's language everywhere. Other men on the sidelines of my soccer or football games, burly attendants at the Hess station around the corner from our house, and the slick or heroic guys in mob and war movies on HBO. Though none of these characters spoke exactly like my father, they shared similar phrases. My old lady's busting my stones. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. The union's gonna screw the part-timers out of Benny's. I often wished I had a guidebook, a father-to-son pocket translator that could define these foreign terms. For Christmas one year, he made a t-shirt for my cousin Shannon, who was working as a stewardess at the time. She unfolded the tissue paper and read the front of the shirt while it was still in the box, while my father threw up his hands proclaiming his innocence. Shaking her head, she held it up for all to see. Stewardesses always stay face down in the cockpit. When I found this scene in one of our old home movies, I watched my 10-year-old self stare at my father, then the shirt, then back to my father, wondering where his ideas came from.
So Dad could have two reactions. One, that pretty well nailed it. Two, how dare you?
Yeah.
So what do you say?
Both. Yeah, I think there was, we were chatting about this earlier at dinner. There's something unique about memoir, not only because you're writing about your family, you're writing about true events. I spent 5 years writing this book, so this material was in my head, on my computer, in my head while I was running, talking about it in conversation all the time, to then having family members experience it for the first time. So I kind of had to go back to somehow try and remember what it was like to write these things for the first time or reread these things when they were fresher. And that's nearly impossible, right? And I think there were some moments where, yeah, I mean, people were offended and put off, but I think ultimately they've been very supportive and appreciative in a lot of ways that I didn't expect.
Is Dad proud of you?
He is. I believe so.
Okay. Tell our audience about Don, the brother. Yeah. Reading this and just going by memory, he seems like he's an angry guy. Is he an angry guy?
No, I think
He's tough.
Yeah, he's a tough guy. He was my older brother. He still is. And, he was definitely, if there was a tougher one, it was him. And I idolized him the same way that I idolized my father. I was a very impressionable kid. And I kind of, went around like, I don't know, I was kind of like the human version of tofu. I was just kind of absorbing whatever flavor was around me. I was just kind of like, all right, so you're doing this, maybe I should do that. You're doing that, maybe I should do that. My brother's an artist, maybe I should be an artist. My father is doing this, maybe I should do that. And I appreciated all those things, but I think I had no kind of clear sense of my identity for a long time. So my brother was tough. I think he had the same kind of thoughts and behavior as me, but just acted out in different ways. And I think, we've both struggled with what are we supposed to do with our lives? What is our job? What are we meant to do? But we experienced it at different times. He was kind of much more outwardly rebellious, whereas I was kind of much more introverted for a while. Until he kind of moved away, and then I kind of was like, all right, now he's gone. I can kind of assume all those qualities and be destructive and be, now I'm the one who's rebellious in the house. So I think it was also our age difference too. I mean, we're 7 years apart, so we kind of were hitting these points in our life at different times, and I think he was pretty upset with some parts in the book, but I think over the last, so the book came out in 2012, over the last, year or two, we've grown closer in ways that I wasn't really expecting to. I think we all have. We're much more open with each other, I feel. And it doesn't have to, link back to the book. It doesn't have to be like, well, thank you for writing that. It changed everything. Yeah. It's not that. It's just kind of, at least from my perspective, I've noticed kind of subtle changes where we are just more open.
Couple of things I want to cover here, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. Be thinking of your question, and Kyle will come right to you. Before Vanessa, I think it was your first major love was a young lady named Mia, correct? And when she went away to school, the relationship sort of waned. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. Has Mia read the book? Has Mia commented?
I haven't been in touch with her. I don't know. I know.
I thought she might find you.
She was aware that the book came out. I think she sent. I think she sent me a Facebook message or something saying like, "Oh, this is good, congrats," but never. I don't know if she read it.
I always wonder when people mention other folks if they have to get their permissions when they're talking about personal stuff.
Well, her name's not Mia, so.
Oh, okay, even better. You were in a restaurant, working in a restaurant.
Yeah.
And I'm reading this thing, and I had to go back and read it again. I'm like, wait a minute, he's being sexually harassed while he's working in the restaurant. This woman's grabbing you, calling you names, making suggestions. She's much older than you. What's going on?
Well, she was kind of like the female version of my dad, and I kind of gravitated towards her in a lot of ways. That's the thing, I kind of appreciated that behavior in a lot of ways. I kind of, just kind of that, there was something kind of raw and honest about that I appreciated, and I kind of...
Did she put it out there like, this kid might go for it. If
No,
it,
she was
if it doesn't.
No, she was
it's
kind of like that
totally
with
innocent?
everybody. Yeah, she was kind of just just very
Wow.
overtly flirtatious, and just kind of had that, she was just like, this tough biker woman, and could just kind of, those things could fly, and they could be, they're harsh and vulgar, but they became terms of endearment. And my father, in a lot of ways too. There's times where like he, uses slang that has evolved into terms of endearment, and I'm fascinated by that too, the way that language can change.
And then in the end, she's the one that introduces you to Vanessa.
Right. Yeah. So she's the one that set us up. Yeah.
We're going to come in the audience. If you'd like to ask a question about any of this, Anthony's life or why he wrote what he did, we'll come to you. If you would ask your question directly, Kyle will come to you right in the front row. We begin tonight. Thank you for being here for the President Speaker Series. Go ahead.
I was wondering about your trip to Vietnam. It seems like you idolize your father a lot. Was the trip just basically just to connect with him more, or was it to find yourself as a person, your values more?
I think I reached a point where, I felt like I talked to my father enough. I'd done a bunch of interviews. I'd read a lot. I just felt like there was still something missing. I wasn't sure what. And there was something just kind of pulling me to go, and then my wife got this opportunity to teach these classes there, and it just felt like, this is the right time. I was in between jobs, as I often was, and it just felt like a good, kind of productive, focused thing to do. I think that was part of it too. I was always looking for something focused and meaningful to do, and this was another piece of this larger project that I was working on that I felt like I needed to do in order to push the book in a direction that I wasn't really sure where it should go. And in a lot of ways, it opened up a lot of different topics that I wouldn't have written about if I didn't go.
I don't want to give the whole thing away, but when you end the book, the way you end it at the memorial, did you struggle with that ending? I mean, did you know this is it, it's done? Or did you have second thoughts to end it there?
Yeah, I kind of, when I talk about memoir, it's kind of like trying to pause a movie that never stops, because you could
have gone on.
You could continue. There's always something else that you could possibly, if you worked enough, shape in a way that could be, the end or part of the book. I thought when the moving Vietnam Wall came to our hometown, it felt like, again, another one of those moments where, this is someone or something is telling you that this needs to be in there and focused on. So
Readers will love the ending. Up there. Good evening.
What lessons, if any, did you learn from your father?
What lessons?
Yes.
I think going back to work, I was raised in a very, blue-collar family. My father worked in a deli. My mom did a lot of jobs. She cleaned houses for a while. And physical work became very important to me. And I was just raised to understand work as you do this job, you come home, you wash it off, you eat dinner, you go to sleep. And then I end up writing, and I find myself always trying to balance it with some kind of physical activity. So, and then there's, if you read a lot about writers, there's often some kind of physical component. A lot of writers are runners. I'm a runner. A lot of, writers do some kind of, feel the need to exert themselves physically after maybe exerting themselves mentally. That sounds a little too corny, but I think I learned from my father that even if work, well, I guess I took that idea of physical work and then I kind of turned it into whether your work is physical or not, you need to feel like you've exerted yourself in order to feel, for me, feel whole.
Back up in the audience, your question. Good evening.
All right, good evening. I'm going to get a little philosophical here.
Sure.
Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living.
You're going to have to hold the mic just a little closer. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living. You examined your life, obviously. What did you discover with that?
Can I throw a quote back at you? I like James Baldwin's quote that it's the writer's responsibility to excavate the experiences of the people that produced him. And I like that word excavate because I think memoir has a lot of digging to it, digging down, looking for some kind of true, capital T, foundation. So I do feel like we kind of live very fast-paced, and opportunities for slowing things down are kind of rare. I think even that word "slow" in our culture is kind of seen to have negative connotations. We want everything to be fast. One of the things about writing is I feel like you can kind of slow things down, slow life down a little bit, especially if you're writing about your own life. And going back to that word excavate, I like that kind of archaeological connotation of it, where you get to take moments from your life, kind of dig them up and hold them up to the light and examine them. And I think we kind of all do that in one way or another, even if we're not writing about it. I feel like we're often looking for moments to slow things down, to reflect. Some people do it in prayer, some people do it by writing, some people do it in meditation. And that is something that's very important to me, even beyond this book.
You taught for 5 years in a prison.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I was volunteering teaching creative writing through this organization called Penn New England. And it was just every other Saturday I was volunteering. And then I became really interested in it. And there was a position open at a prison in Boston teaching literacy. So I taught for about 5 years teaching men from 18 all the way up to 70 who all read below a fourth grade level. So we would do kind of basic grammar and syllables, and some guys were beginning with the alphabet. But then I'd also read stories out loud, and we get into kind of these. I was always kind of pushing it in the direction of kind of working in some kind of talking about gender roles and gender communication, and we'd often talk about violence. We'd talk about these things that a lot of the guys in the room had different experiences with than I did. Because I began very naively. I was kind of like, oh, so we should learn how to fill out job applications, or you want to know about quarry reform. And they were like, we learn about that every day. We hear that all the time. Like, they were more interested in stories, in narrative. So we were able to, do a lot of basic literacy type things, but I would often read aloud to them, which they hadn't been in a school setting for a while. They would also push me to give them spelling tests and vocabulary tests, just because a lot of them, that was the last time they were in school, was maybe in elementary school.
Wow.
And they wanted that. They wanted that structure. They wanted it to be graded.
Was that in Massachusetts?
Yeah, that was in Boston.
Okay. And then you make the ascension to Regis College?
Yep, so I'm at Regis College now. I direct the writing program there. So I teach some creative writing courses and run the first-year writing program.
In the audience now, Kyle has a question. Good evening.
I have a question. This is more so about your dad. I don't know, I hadn't read your book yet, but as far as I'm a vet myself, brothers that have come back from war and things like that, after they would hold it back a lot, but after you brought all this back up after so many years, how did that affect your dad? Or did it?
Well, that was the thing that, I kind of get that question a lot. People will ask me, was it hard for your father to talk about? And in a lot of ways, I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to be difficult for him to talk about. But he was very candid and open and willing to have, sit there while I kind of interviewed him, which made me kind of feel like I could have learned these things much earlier if all I did was ask. So he didn't find it painful or difficult. He was pretty much open from the beginning. And in a lot of ways, it made me feel like maybe consider the other side. If I think of my father as someone who's maybe not as verbal as I am or as open or talkative, it kind of made me think of the other side. Well, maybe no one asked him, Maybe there's some responsibility on the asker's part, no, it's actually, in a lot of ways, talking about the way that maybe the book has changed things. I don't know if maybe my father always wanted to be kind of more active with like our local VA and have more of a presence there, but he does now, and he didn't before. And maybe that's not because of the book, but maybe it's because of conversations, or it's just not having it be something that he didn't talk about, or was just kind of in the past, that it can, it's still a part of him, and can still be something that that's still a part of his life. So.
In the language of men, we'll learn that Dad had 2 heart attacks, I believe. Mm-hmm. And you weren't close. You had to like get to Dad to get home. Mom called, said, but she referred to him as the man, correct?
Yeah. Well,
explain that, the whole thing, because that's a family thing where it becomes a little less personal. The man's been in the hospital.
Yeah, I remember when my grandfather got sick, my grandmother, you're not going to come see him. The man just had a heart attack. The man is sick. The man's lying in his hospital bed. And when my grandmother, she was the one who called me to say that my father, that's when he had a stroke. He was in the hospital. And she was saying, you're not going to come down right away. The man just had a stroke. And there was this, idea of...
it's like almost impersonal.
Well, yeah, you kind of go back to your base identity when your mortality is thrown in your face, I think, and it kind of strips away any other identity to just the man is sick, you need to go. That was a big part of it too. My father's language was such a fascinating thing for me for so long, and then he has a stroke where his speech is impaired temporarily, but for me to hear the way that his voice changed in those moments was, kind of just brought his mortality to the surface.
We learned that, both parents smoked.
Yeah.
And then after the heart attack, they both say they're going to quit, but Dad doesn't quit.
No.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, we were all, it was a family of smokers, and then, we kind of each individually hit it better than others.
Back in the audience.
Okay, you said your wife, Vanessa, is a feminist. When she met your dad, was she like, oh, that explains a lot of your behavior? And how did it change afterwards?
Good question.
No, I mean, it's funny because my wife, Vanessa, was the one who could really get my dad to talk. They have a lot of long conversations when they're together. And I don't know, I don't think she thought that. I think it was more, it was more about me than about what she thought kind of trickled down from my father to me. But yeah, they're the ones that can communicate really well together.
Do you feel you, growing up, were more like your mom than your dad in personality?
I think I had both. I was kind of split. There were these moments where I could be, very vocal, but then I could be very introverted.
That's what I noticed. A little reticent at some time.
Yeah. I kind of went back and forth.
In the audience, your question now for Anthony. Hello.
So kind of going off of your question, would you say that you're your father's son and you emulate him in many aspects, or would you say that you've metamorphosized into something of your own self?
I think I began with the first part that you said. I kind of began as kind of I was modeling myself for a replica in some way, and then I think I came to a point where just having more confidence in who I want to be, what I want to be, what I thought the limits were, what I think the limits are, just kind of pushing my own expectations. I think it's taken a while. I think I struggled with that for a while, just kind of feeling solid in my own identity. Yeah.
Let me see, throughout the others, right up front. Go ahead.
Do you feel as if your life, language, and attitude would be different if you grew up in a more female-dominated household like your wife?
Absolutely, yeah. And as I was saying before, I think what I was trying to do for a while was kind of shoehorn my family into my wife's kind of feminist family, or kind of, instantly combine them and try to, replicate some of the conversations that my wife was having with her family that my family were having, but in a different way. And I think they were much more, my wife's family was much more vocal. My family was much more just kind of activity-based, doing something physical. But yeah, I definitely think it would have been much different.
Do you look at this book now as perhaps, because you're going to become a father soon,
Yeah.
this is an early life legacy for you to leave to your child?
I was actually, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, probably in the last, 7.5 months. And I think, we're all kind of fascinated about what our parents' lives were like before we were around. I'm sure we've all had those moments where we kind of are cleaning out, old pictures or something, and we get distracted and we end up flipping through photo albums or looking at old letters or something like that. And I like the idea of kind of having this portrait of myself at this time. And it kind of exists for however long people are going to appreciate words.
Up front, Arthur, good evening.
You talked about your father and the prostitutes in Vietnam, but did he have any of the horrible war experiences that would keep him up, or would just
Such as Agent Orange?
or traumatic stress, or things like that he would talk about?
No, not in kind of like, the ways that at least, Hollywood tells us. Not in, he didn't, I think that's a lot of those stories I expected. I think that's why some of his stories surprised me. But the ways that Vietnam vets have been affected have sort of come out later with my father. Like not too long ago, he got a tattoo that, with the dates of when he was in Vietnam. Just, it was kind of random. Him and my brother went and got it. And then
You and Don have them too, right?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So he gets this tattoo with the dates on it. He goes to for a checkup at the VA. The nurse sees it and says, "Oh, you were there during this time. You should check out this Agent Orange study that was going on here about how Agent Orange is exposure is being linked to heart disease." And then he ends up participating in that study, and there's a chance that some of the exposure to Agent Orange affected some of the heart issues that he's had. So, while he may not have, there weren't some of those, maybe those classic stories that I was, like I said, naively expecting. They've been coming out in other ways.
Looking for anyone with a question now. If you raise your hand, Kyle will come right to you. Are you going to write a second book about your life? Or what's your next book going to be?
I've actually been working more about my experiences teaching in the prison. One of my students was imprisoned in the facility that he helped build. So he was a former construction worker imprisoned in the facility that he helped build. And I remember him in class. Every once in a while, I'd see him just kind of looking around, admiring it, or he'd tell me about how it was so well constructed, and he was proud of the building. And he also helped construct some of the major kind of iconic buildings in Boston and some of the schools and colleges. So I kind of just became interested in this idea of prisoners building their own prisons. And there's actually a pretty rich and disturbing history of that I've been just kind of getting more into lately. So I'm more in like the research phase now.
Yeah, be sure to let us know. What impression, that 5 years, what was it about prisons that you didn't know, or you walked away from that experience knowing that you didn't know when you went into it?
That most of my students just really wanted to talk. We spent a lot of time talking. And sometimes it was on topic, sometimes it wasn't. But in every other place in the prison, they were told to shut up and not have an opinion. And then I come in and I'm saying, well, what do you think of this story? Or what's your opinion on this? And for a while it was silent. When we started to connect it to some of the experiences that they've had, connecting it to their own lives, the class became much more vocal. And
They want to be heard.
Yeah.
These people wanted to be heard.
Yeah. So it was, some of the things people ask me is like, did you ever feel threatened, or was there officers in the room with you, or did anyone ever get violent with you? And those things never really happened. There was, never a time where anyone was violent towards me, or I felt unsafe. No one would ever really ask me about, oh, what were you teaching these guys, or what were you talking about in class? It was more, what are they making out of bars of soap, and what, just kind of how much are they working out? These kind of like just these things we see over and over again in movies that my students weren't doing.
Back of the audience, your question for Anthony.
When you finally took a step back and examined your life and everything that happened to you, what did you discover?
What did I discover? I think one of the things that I discovered was that I kind of I just kind of accepted a lot of things. I didn't really question or try and decide on my own about what I wanted to do or the decisions that I was making. It was kind of just doing what I felt was expected of me. And I think kind of developing the confidence to just do what I want to do has been a big part of this book and kind of a big part of who I am now. But I don't think I have any answers. I think that's oftentimes kind of going back to what you were saying about therapy, right? I don't come to the end of this book and feel like I have answers about myself or my family. I think for a while, naively, I thought that's what I was doing. I was coming up, I was solving something. But I don't think memoir is about answers, it's more about questioning, about exploring these questions, about asking better questions.
Anthony, it's the language of men. No sisters.
No sisters, no.
Do you wish that you'd had sisters? Was that missing? Did you feel that was missing when you were growing up with Don?
No, I mean, I think it would have changed the dynamic in some way, obviously, but no, I didn't feel like there was a missing piece or anything.
Will readers know about cousins, aunts, uncles? Are there other people outside of the immediate family
That are in the book?
that shaped your life?
Oh, yeah, I mean, sure, in lots of ways. But I feel like I really focused on, my father is pretty much, besides me, the main character in the book, and it was kind of my, I do see it as a tribute to him in a lot of ways, but I also see it as kind of, okay, now where am I? Stepping out of that shadow.
For our radio audience, as well as those here, and I hope you'll get a copy of this book, there's a scene in this book about cars. And there's one particular time there's a car, and help me understand this. The radiator cap blew, and what happened? Was that a car that Dad worked on that something happened?
No, that was my car. So we rebuilt a '66 Dodge Coronet together, and that was my first car. And it was, we got it as good as we could get it. And, we were saving money, we were doing it ourselves, it was great. But there were moments where, things busted loose and things, the radiator cap exploded and there was just antifreeze spraying everywhere. And it was, after we had it, it was this perfect, cherry red paint, and it was, just kind of this green ooze splattering all over the car. And it was.
Is he behind you while you're driving the
Yeah,
car?
yeah. So he pulls up next to me while I'm, in the breakdown lane, and we're both kind of frantically trying to clean it up, and it was, one of those moments of it's looking good on the outside, but we got some internal things going on right now.
Do you feel that you've inherited that from your father, the mechanical prowess?
Oh, not enough.
Not enough?
Clearly not enough. No, I wish more. Pretty handy, but not like him. When he comes up to visit, I'm like, oh yeah, I have a list going. It's like, that light's not working, I have no idea why. That step, I don't know, it's a little creaky, can you help me out with that?
When I was researching you, there's a really neat photo of your father working on a car. That's Dad, right? Working on the car?
Yeah.
That's typical, that's the way I pictured him.
Yeah.
In the audience, questions way back there, good evening.
When you were starting to come up with all the ideas, and most people when they have all these memories, why did you want to put it into a book?
Good question. I was just really fascinated with just memoir as a genre. I think it often gets put down as, all right, so it happened, so it's not so creative. I like the idea of, as I said before, kind of having these scenes that you can tinker with, but you can't make things up. So you need to find some kind of narrative structure. So I think I was fascinated with the idea of, turning it into a narrative. I don't know, I wasn't really thinking much about kind of, I want this to be a book to influence people or anything like that. I just kind of felt like, I was interested in like narrative structure in memoir. And, I guess there's a certain amount of wanting an audience for your work too. You want that audience component to it. That's kind of, in some ways that feels like when a book is finished, right, is when a reader is reading it. So that kind of having some response and having a dialogue about it. But you mean like, why would I want to publish it? I guess kind of the reasons why a writer would want to publish anything, having an audience feedback, partly ego, partly wanting some kind of validation.
The people who thought something of this book wrote, Tracy Kidder, one of my favorites, writes, "This book is an impressive debut from a young writer. Mr. Diaries has many admirable traits, including a distinctive style. It is a pleasure to keep company with him in these moving and insightful pages." That prompted me to ask you, of writing style, is there someone that you admired, someone that you really appreciated, enjoyed reading, and sort of adopted part of that within your own style of writing?
Sure. I'm a big fan of Tobias Wolff. I like Raymond Carver's short stories. I think whether it was fiction or nonfiction, I was interested in kind of quote unquote everyday, normal suburban lives. It was funny because you were talking about differences between me and my brother. My brother is often fascinated with, these adventure stories of, exploring the Amazon jungle or these kind of, climbing Mount Everest. And I enjoy those books for a moment, but I often kind of find myself, my mind starts wandering. But I like those stories of seemingly simple families or everyday lives, and how they're much more complex, and how all of our lives are complex. And that's what I love about memoir, and that's why I think it's different than autobiography, is that I'm not writing from the day I was born to the present. No one would want to read that. But memoir gives you the opportunity to kind of focus in on a particular aspect of your life, or keep exploring these scenes through a particular lens. And I'm also fascinated by the idea of writing more than one memoir, like the authors that revisit topics as your perspective changes. I mean, that's the thing too. It's like, kind of going back to the question before about it, what have you learned, or, and me talking about it not being about an answer, is because this was my perspective at that time. And that has changed and will change and will continue to change. I remember talking to one of my professors who's a memoirist, and he was working on his book for a long time, and it was turning out to be kind of separated into 3 chunks of when he wrote it in his mid-20s, when he was writing in his 30s to 40s, and when he was writing in his 50s and 60s. And at that point, the manuscript was kind of chronicling his changing perspective over the course of his life. So, something had happened this second that would make me write a completely different book than the one I did at that time. Things can shift, things can change.
You have another book out, don't you?
I do not, no.
I thought for some reason there was another one that you've written. What I liked too about this was that I could relate to your dad as well. He's maybe just a few years older than me, but he's like me, or I'm like him. I'm stuck in the 60s, late 60s into the 70s. The music he liked, the radio station he would listen to, the way it would energize him when he heard the music. How would your mother react? Did she share those same feelings about the music, or she just said, that's him and that's why I love him?
No, she loves all those bands and music, and a lot of the movies that we like too. But again, she was kind of more behind the scenes in a lot of ways. My dad and I would always kind of play this kind of name that tune game where we would test each other with lyrics.
Do you do that with movies too?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah.
Okay, so all the De Niro stuff and Goodfellas and all that?
Yeah, my brother and I kind of communicate. Our text messages would look like, if you just put them all together, they would probably turn out to be the script from 3 or 4 different Robert De Niro movies. But oftentimes my mom knew those lyrics and could answer those questions. But in a lot of ways, it was a guy's game. But then I remember hearing moments where I'm falling asleep in the back of the car when I'm little, and they're playing that game together when we're not awake. And there are those moments where you get a glimpse of your parents' lives before you were around. And there's stories I don't know, and there's stories that I'll never know all the stories. And there's something rich and fascinating about that idea of never really knowing all the parts of someone.
I said this earlier in the interview. When you read this book, you're touched by it because you know someone who either experienced or thought some of the things that are written in this book. And I sent you messages a couple of times today saying, I know this. There's a story in here about a stolen watch. Do you mind telling that?
Sure. So I went through a bit of a kind of a kleptomaniac phase, as a lot of young kids do. And I remember going to my father's friend's house, and they had this amazing Coke bottle collection of just all these old Coke bottles and all this Coca-Cola memorabilia. And so you're a kid and you're wandering around and you're looking at all this stuff. And I remember there being a watch that had the little like Coca-Cola bears on it, and for some reason, in the moment it just makes sense. Like, I'm going to take that. And you don't even know why you do these things. And
how old are you when you do it?
I don't know. I was in elementary school, so 8 or 9 or something like that. And then feeling like the watch gathered more power the longer I had it, and it was just a matter of time before it, burned a hole in my dresser and everyone saw it, and it was I had to get rid of it. So then I I just took it down the street and smashed it. That was my answer to it. Not give it back or admit it, but just destroy it. And I remember right when I was doing it, it was one of those moments where like, your parents know what you're doing and they're gonna find you, so you better hide. And I was at the end of the street doing it, and right as I was doing it, my dad was turning around the corner and pulling up the street. And I've asked him about it, and he was like, I didn't know what you were doing, but I was convinced that he knew.
Because when the watch was broken, you throw it in some bushes,
Yeah.
and then the parts disappear?
Yeah, so I threw it in the bushes, and then I went back to look for it the next day, and they were gone. And are they just deeper in the weeds somewhere? Or, I don't know, for me, I was convinced. That was more about being a kid at that moment and believing that my dad had saw me and gone back and collected the parts and was gonna,
That's one of those stories that's in this book. We have time for one more question in the audience. Back here, thank you for being with us.
My last question would be, we talk about living our life the best of our potential. And would you say that you going into your father's life, going to Vietnam, was that like an obstacle you wanted to overcome just to be a better man, and it helped complete your life?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard because I guess in hindsight I can say, sure, yeah. But I think just having the confidence to pursue something when you don't know why you're doing it is an important skill to learn. Sometimes we're always trying to figure out exactly why we're doing what we're doing. And I think as a writer, you can kind of stunt yourself or kind of edit yourself prematurely if you think, no, this is what it has to be about. This is what I'm writing. I think for a while, and I think that maybe that's why it took a good chunk of time, was that I felt like, no, I'm writing about this. No, wait, now I'm writing about this. And I think when I started to pull back and allow myself to kind of wander a little bit and not feel like I had to know all the answers before, or even get away from that idea of answers, that gave me the confidence to kind of wander in other ways later on, give myself time to figure things out, whether it's, something challenging at work, or it's, you're having an argument with your wife and you're trying to, you feel that impulse to solve it right away, where it's, maybe we just need to kind of, linger in this moment. One of my other writing mentors, his favorite 3 words were dwell, linger, stay. I remember him writing that in the margins of a lot of things that I wrote, just dwell here for a while, linger here for a while, stay in that moment. And not feel like I need to know why I'm doing this. So just kind of giving myself, or developing the confidence to wander for longer than you think you might have the stamina for.
Anthony will be signing copies of this book coming up in the next few minutes, and my colleagues Brendan and Winston will be selling copies right there. And as soon as we complete, Anthony will make his way right over to the table, so if you'd all line up over there, you can say hello for a few moments and maybe get a signed copy of the book. I want to thank a few people who made this broadcast possible in this event tonight. Tony Petro, who's joined us now in IT, Kyle Corbett, Richard Weekly, who's been with us since the very beginning, Brendan Corey, Conroy, I should say, Chris Hodo, and Chan Wara back at our station for producing tonight's event. And Dr. M.B. McLatchey, who made this suggestion so many months ago, thank you so much for your thoughtfulness and coming forward to us. Our next event is coming up a week from tomorrow night, and it's a beauty. It's one that you don't want to miss. We're going to talk about terrorism and communication. Coming up Thursday night, March 6th, Dr. Jonathan Matuzits, Associate Professor at UCF, will talk about his book, Terrorism and Communication, A Critical Introduction. He will outline 15 different ways that terrorism exists and the reasons, and you're going to be surprised at what he says. C-SPAN will be here for that, and it will be live at 1150 WNDB. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a round of applause for Anthony D'Aries. Thank you so much for being with us. Enjoy your evening. On WNDB, more of Sean Hannity.